Hi everyone, Jeremy here from Video Studio, and in this video I'll share with you how to create a realistic screen effect in DaVinci Resolve. First we'll go through how to create the LED panel to have the starting block for our effect. Then we'll move on to the stylization of the effect to make it look good using stuff like glow and chromatic aberration. And finally I'll share a few more tips that can help you differentiate yourself from the crowd. So if you're ready, let's jump right into it. Alright, so we are in DaVinci Resolve right now. We are on the edit page and I have a screen recording in my timeline of artlist. I would like to make that a bit more interesting by having that LED effect going on. So what we're going to do is right click on our clip and we're going to go over to a new Fusion clip and select that. Then we're going to go over to Fusion, and then here the first thing that we can realize is that we don't have our screen recording filling the entire frame. This is very common because aspect ratio can vary depending on what you're recording. So what I would do in a scenario like this one is bring a new background, gonna unlink here that media in, and we're gonna link it instead to the background one. Then I'm gonna link the merge to the media out. What it does is basically here extending. We have like a background here, and then we have the video clip, and then you can just pick whatever color fit best. In our case right now by default it's black, so we're gonna just take the picker and we're gonna select the more prominent color in the entire frame. That could be this right here, or that could be, for example, the other one right there on the side. So just select the color that works best for your scenario, and then let's move on. Now to create the LED pattern, there is many ways to go about it. You could use the skyline, you could then displace them and change the RGB. There is really like maybe 3 or 4 ways to go about it, but I would like you to understand what's going on for the pattern and what we try to achieve. So basically what we're trying to emulate are those RGB red, green, and blue LED. So you can search online and get one of those, RGB LED pattern, and I'll show you right now how to use it, or we can create it from scratch, which is very easy, and then you can customize it as you want. So basically to create it, I'm just going to bring here a new background, then I'm going to bring a second background, I'm going to link it to this one, then we're going to take a rectangular mask and we're going to link that mask here to the background. I'm going to bring that to my view right here. And then here, I'm going to go to my first background and I'm going to go to image. I'm going to take auto resolution and I'm basically going to reduce the resolution of that image. I'm going to do maybe, I don't know, 500 and 250. I'm doing that because we don't need to have that file being too big, otherwise that's going to slow down the playback. So, a small resolution is good enough. Right now, I'm just going to go to the background 3 and we're going to start by having the red color. So here, I'm just going to select red. Then here for the rectangle, I'm just going to reduce the width. So we're going to reduce the width to, a rectangle. This size seems to be fine. You can just go approximatively. There is no need to be extremely precise, and you can change that later on anyway. So I'm just going to eyeball it. I think this is fine. Then I'm going to reduce the height as well. So I'm going to reduce the height considerably, like so. Perfect. Now I'm going to make a copy of that rectangle and I'm going to paste 2 instances. So I'm going to right click, paste an instance, right click, paste an instance, and then here in the center I'm gonna de-instance it, and then I'm gonna de-instance the second one as well. That way we're gonna be able to move each rectangle individually. So here I'm gonna take another background. This time it's gonna be green. I'm gonna bring it up fully. I'm gonna link the first mask to the background, and then I'm gonna bring third background, and this time it's gonna be blue, and I'm gonna link the rectangle mask to that background. I'm gonna link each of those rectangle to the main composition and then bring the view right here. Now we're just gonna displace first the red. So I'm gonna take the position and I'm gonna slide it right here to the right. And then I'm gonna do exactly the same thing here with the blue. I'm gonna select the blue and I'm gonna slide the position over. Now we have some sort of flag, and what we can do is basically go back to rectangle 1, and now we can play around with the border width, and that give us that pixel effect thing. We can also here adjust the corner radius if we want to have pixels that have either straight edges or round edges. So you can just make a bunch of modification like that. That's why I like that method, that we can really create the pixel that you want. Once you're happy with your pixel pattern, you can just go to the background too, and then we're going to make some adjustment to the frame, just so we have about, the same distance here in between each pixel and in between the border. So we're going to do something like that. Actually, I'm going to do half because it's going to repeat itself. And then I'm going to do the same thing down there. Perfect. And now we could directly use that in our composition, and then here in our merge, we could just switch the edges to wrap. And as you can see, that's just duplicating everything. And now if we're reducing that size, we're getting that RGB grid thing going on. And then you can make adjustments to that effect by just increasing or decreasing the size in the merge. You can play around with different blending mode, which is going to give you different results depending on the screen recording that you have and the colors that you have. And then you can play around with the gain and the blend depending on the intensity that you want for that LED panel. Now, I really like that technique because it gives you a lot of control over it, and you can easily go back to here, checking the size, remaking your adjustment here with, like the corner radius, if you want to see, how that looks with like circle LED or like square LED, if you want to have more black or less black in your image, so on and so forth. You can play around and you have like really good control over that. But then once you're happy with your look, I will suggest to export an image and use an image instead of that composition, because later on when we're going to start to add more effect like glow, chromatic aberration, it's going to start to become very, very heavy, and it's going to be really hard to get real-time playback on that. So I would suggest to just play around with this, get the look that you want. Then once you're happy with your pattern, you can just go back to this merge, and then you can right click, save image, and then we're gonna save that file as a JPEG or GP, and then I'm gonna save that to my desktop or anywhere else you want on your computer. Then you can just take it and drag it in your working area, and rather than using that big node composition, we can use that media instead to get exactly the same result. So that's what I meant earlier when I show you this image. You can do this with any image that you find on the web. Take it, drag it, and you can have exactly the same thing right here. Right now I'm gonna unzoom from my viewer, click zoom to fit, and now we can just adjust the size of that LED panel to get the look that we want. So this is going to be the starting point for our effect. Now we're going to move on to make it look nicer by playing around with glow, chromatic aberration, and pixelization. All right, so the first thing that I will do in that scenario is add a mosaic blur on the actual screen recording. So I'm just going to go back right before I've applied the RGB effect. And here I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to show you the writing. As you can see, it looks smooth and clean. And if I were to record, a screen with the camera, we might see a bit of pixelization, and it's just not gonna look as clean as that because that's just a digital render. So to do that, I'm gonna select my media in, hit shift space on my keyboard, and I'm gonna search for a mosaic blur, and I'm gonna bring that in. Right now, obviously, it's way too much. So even if here I increase to the maximum, as you can see, we can still not read it. So what I'm going to do is here, I'm going to modify it to 2000. And here we go. Now it's on purpose looking slightly less sharp than what we had before. If I toggle it on and off, I don't know if you see with, the video being rendered through a viewer, but pretty much here, as you can see, we're getting the text pixelated a little bit, and that's really helped to make it look a bit more realistic, especially then when you start to add the pixel and when we're going to play around with the glow and the chromatic aberration. Then personally, the second thing that I will add is a glow effect, because that's really going to help the screen pop up a lot more. So I'm gonna hit shift space on my keyboard and I'm gonna search for glow and bring that in. Here I'm just gonna bring the viewer to the media out, and as you can see, that's just really bring the entire composition to life, in my opinion. So then you can play around with the glow size, with the glow, and with the blend to dial in or extend the overall effect. So what I tend to do in terms of the value for something like this, I will go at glow size 10 and then 0.5 for the glow itself. And then I'm just gonna dial in the intensity of the effect using the blend. So that's what I will do. In that case, I'm gonna leave it at 0.2, maybe 0.3, and we might come back to it after the chromatic aberration. So yeah, I just prefer that you understand the core principle on how to add those effects and modify them, rather than trying to copy the value that I'm putting on screen, and that might not work for your footage, for example. So yeah, just don't be afraid to modify the value and really make it your own. Then another node that I tend to add is the brightness node. So I'm going to select my merge, hit shift space on my keyboard and bring a brightness node. That will help me to make some modification to the gain, the lift, the gamma, the contrast, the brightness, saturation, so on and so forth, to fine tune the color and intensity of the entire effect. I think that can be really, really helpful. So here, for example, in that scenario, I will select the alpha channel and I will bring the gain up a little bit more. And then I will bring the lift down a little bit, so the black are appearing slightly darker. Now for the chromatic aberration, unfortunately, DaVinci doesn't have something great built in. I have my own personal node that I use, that I've created, but I'm going to show you how to create your own right now. So what I would do is use a series of transform node and directional blur to create that effect. So I'm going to hit shift space on my keyboard, bring a transform node, and bring that in. Right now, I'm just going to create a simple rectangle as a dummy, just to give you an idea of, how the chromatic aberration work and how it's affecting your footage. So here, I'm going to just do that. Perfect. So just to be clear, this is just a dummy to create like a, a rectangle, so you can visualize the effect a bit better than me working on the entire composition for now. So I'm going to bring a transform, all right? And then we're going to straight up copy that transform and we're going to paste an instance of it. Then we're going to link the output of that transform to that instance. And then here in the first one, I'm going to go over to setting and I'm going to deactivate the green, blue, and alpha channel. Then we're going to go over to the instance transform. And here in setting, we're going to right click here on each of those RGB value and de-instance them. That way now we can just remove the red value and switch it to the blue value. And as you can see, it hasn't been changed here in the process of the transform one, while all the other values, so the size, position, etc., will be linked between the transform and being shared between both transform. Now here in the instance, what I'm going to do is right click on invert transform and I'm going to de-instance that. That way it's going to inverse everything that is happening right here. So that now means that if I increase the size, I'm going to have one transform expanding the rectangle and the second transform reducing the rectangle at the same time. And that's going to do it with different RGB value, this one being red and the other one being blue. And that basically going to help us create some sort of gradient, which is going to be our sort of chromatic aberration. But now, as you can see, that's solid. To change that, I'm going to bring a blur. So I'm going to select my instance, hit shift space on my keyboard, and we're going to bring here a blur. We're going to use the directional blur. I'm going to bring that to my viewer. And then here, we're going to switch from linear to zoom. And basically, if I increase the length from the center, it's just going to give like a direction blur. Right now, 1 for me is not enough. So I'm going to increase that to 0.5. And here we have something that is a lot more intense. So you can just play around and really get the value that you want for that. But personally, what I like to do is to keep a ratio between the size of the transform and the directional blur. So what I'm going to do is link the lens value to the size. So I'm going to here pin my first transform. So it's always here in the inspector, expand my inspector to have more space. And then I'm going to go to the directional blur. I'm going to right click here on the lens and I'm going to use expression and I'm going to link here the length to the size. Now it's out of proportion because the size is starting at 1 and it's not the case for the length. So what I'm going to do here in my expression, I'm just going to write -1. Right now, if I increase the size, we're getting that yellow-red pattern. And if I decrease it, we're getting that blue pattern. So yeah, that's just one of the chromatic aberration tool that I've created for myself. And that's how I will go about, making something like that. Now I show you and that you understand how that works, I'm just going to delete the example and we're going to bring that back in our composition. So here I'm going to link the output of the merge to the transform, and then link the directional blur to the brightness and contrast node. Now, as we go, that might be hard to see the change that is happening, but here, maybe in the corner, you can see that there is, some RGB split going on. If we were to zoom in, I'm going to zoom in here by a lot. As you can see now, there is that cursor that have that little chromatic aberration thing. If we were to deactivate the transform and the blur, as you can see, that's how it looks without none of the thing that we've created. And here is how it looks once we activate everything. Now this effect going to be more prominent in the corner. So here, if I go on the corner of the frame, as you can see, that's a lot more intense because the center point is in the middle of our viewer. So, just don't overdo it. Be, mindful when you're applying that. As you can see here, just a little bit goes a long way. So you don't have to use too much of it. Right now, I think just that is enough in my case, personally. But again, that might depend relative on your footage and also where you want the focus to be and how zoomed in you are in your composition as well. After that, we're going to use a DVE, and as you can see, we're going to drive more attention to a certain part of the screens. So we might need to come back and raise that up or bring it down. So right now, here is the result that we got so far by using the Mosaic blur, the glow, the brightness and contrast, and creating our own chromatic aberration. As you can see, there is already a pretty big jump between just the LED on their own and now all the effect being applied. Now, finally, we're going to play around with the perspective to make that composition even more interesting. So to change the angle of our entire composition, we're going to use a DVE node. So I'm going to select here my glow. I'm going to hit Shift space on my keyboard, and I'm going to search for DVE. And I'm going to bring that in. Now we have basically control over the rotation on the X, Y, and Z axis. So here we can move each of those values to get basically the placement that we want, and then we can move the overall position. So what I'm going to do here is basically placing myself slightly here on the top, and then I'm going to increase the Z move, which is the equivalent of the size, and I'm going to try to find the right angle for me right now. And now basically, as you can see, we are a lot more zoomed in, and also we are a lot more on the left side of the entire composition. So we see some effect more than other. For example, here we have our chromatic aberration popping a lot more. So what we could do, for example, here, if that's a bit too much and we want to reduce that, we don't have necessarily to reduce it completely. We can simply here select the directional blur and then modify the position. And as you can see, we're going to get different type of blur depending on where the position is. And that can help us also refocus on what matters. For example, here, if we want to have the focus on that text, we can bring that position on the sound effect, and that will be sharper compared to the rest of the composition. Or I can do that here on the track. You got the power, and then that means this is going to be the sharpest point on the entire frame. Now we can also reduce the overall strength of that effect. So here I'm going to reduce that a little bit because right now it's really too much and over the top in my opinion. I think in this case 1.002 is enough. I don't want to have more. Now that we have the final composition, we can go back to this and play around with the blending as well. For example, here color dodge could be interesting to play around with, and we can play around with the size if we want to have something that looks, with a very poor quality. We can here play around with the blend. For example, if you're gonna try to record a screen, very often you might get those visible RGB line, etc. So that might be something that you want to try to replicate. So I would suggest to play around with both size, apply mode, and the blend. Those three settings are the most impactful one and gonna really dictate the look of your effect. For this one, we're gonna keep it fairly natural and we're gonna stay like that. Now I'm gonna go to my DVE, and finally I'm gonna create a simple animation. So I'm gonna go on my first frame at 0 right here, and we're gonna drop a keyframe on the X, Y, and Z axis. So I'm gonna drop a keyframe on all of those. And then we're going to go to our last frame, and I'm going to modify my angle to basically create the starting and ending movement. So I'm going to do something like this. And here we go. Now we have our final effect. So I hope this video was helpful and you learned a few things along the way. Let me know if you bother me going in detail and trying to explain to you the principle behind using a certain node or creating certain effect, or if you rather just get straight to the point within the 5 to 10 minutes and not taking any detour. That will be really helpful for me in the future to craft a tutorial that are helpful to as many people as possible. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Speed up your workflow and create better videos using the pack available on our website, including titles, transition, and templates built only for DaVinci Resolve. Get started today by downloading our free starter pack that contains over 150 elements. Link in the description below or at videoeditorstudio.com.